From our studios in New York, here again is Tom Brokaw.
We have another story tonight about uncommon courage during wartime, but the woman you're about to meet never served in the military. She was a secretary here on the home front as war raged on in Vietnam, but somehow she wanted to find a way to save lives, and somehow she did find a way to save hundreds of them. If you've ever doubted that one person can make a difference, her story will put those doubts to rest. Here's Keith Morrison.
What do they see up there?
A rainbow!
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
In an old house in Seattle lives a grandmother who once, a long time ago, got the crazy idea that she could make a difference in the world.
I never wanted to be satisfied with my lot in life.
And way across the country in Boston, fresh from Yale, a bright young woman is just now understanding how much difference. They were together once, when just surviving was what mattered. The story starts 40 years ago in Vietnam, before it was America's war, before we learned that even the most powerful country in the world can't always change things. Vietnam was devastating for everyone, but especially for children. The war was a factory for orphans. It produced 800,000 orphaned or just abandoned. If they were lucky, they got to grow up in orphanages. But how lucky was this?
They didn't have indoor plumbing at all. They were just going in gutters.
Betty Tisdale was a secretary then. She worked at U.S. Steel. 20-something, independent, free. But she couldn't stop thinking it wasn't enough, especially after she read a book by a renowned doctor named Tom Dooley, a one-man relief agency who was treating the victims of the war while he raised American money to help them. Betty sought out Dooley himself and volunteered to help. He told her about an orphanage in the slums of Saigon, a place called On Loc, and about the woman who ran it, Madame Nye, an aristocrat who fled the north after her husband was killed. She collected a family of orphans along the way.
She picked up children who were lying on the road next to their parents who were dead.
Dooley told her the story from a hospital cancer ward, where at the age of 34, he died. But his words about On Loc stayed with Betty. She bought a ticket to Saigon to see the orphanage for herself and meet Madame Nye, the only mother many of these children would ever know. On Loc was the best life the orphans had, but it was, to Betty's eyes, horrifying.
I saw the babies in hammocks made of rags strung between rusty cribs. I knew that my life had changed. I could not go back to being a secretary at U.S. Steel.
Living a comfortable life.
I just felt like I was taking.
Besides, she realized, now there was no one to raise the money for On Loc, except her, a regular person, a secretary.
And the milk we get isn't that good. It's part rice water, I guess. So I'm getting more milk.
Betty didn't even speak Vietnamese, though the children didn't seem to care about that.
I consider all the children of On Loc, they were my babies.
Before you started, you were like anybody else, looking at the world with all kinds of things broken. But, you know, you can't change the world. That's the feeling that most people have, I think. And didn't you?
Well, when I was growing up, my aunt was was a wonderful person, but never ventured to do a lot. And she would always say to me, be satisfied with your lot in life. But the words be satisfied really rankled me, because you can't be satisfied with your life and do something.
So she saved her vacations for Vietnam and the orphanage. And at home in New York, dreamed up ways to pay for what they needed there.
I would work till 2 and 3 in the morning and live on candy bars.
Betty's life revolved around On Loc. She took a job as Senator Jacob Javits' secretary because it gave her access to powerful people with money and connections.
I called Mrs. Johnson of Johnson & Johnson.
You said the senator was calling?
And
he didn't even know what you were doing.
She'd say, Jack, and I'd say, oh, I'm sorry, but the senator's in Washington. But I said, he suggested that I give you a call And I started talking to her about my orphanage. And the next thing I knew, she had switched me down to the right people, and I got tons and tons of diapers and powder and Band-Aids.
Did he understand that it was you using him?
Mm-mm, not then.
And you often had to do things kind of by hook or by crook.
That's right, and I never paid for anything, except stamps.
When Betty told American servicemen about On Lock, those soldiers, on their days off, brought medical care and supplies, and then stayed to build showers and indoor bathrooms.
They were godsend to the children.
One of them, an Army pediatrician, a widowed colonel named Patrick Tisdale, whom she married, which is how Betty found herself an instant mother to 5 boys.
After about 6 months, I said, no way do I want to hem up another pair of pants. I want little girls' dresses.
So Betty adopted 5 girls from the orphanage, always choosing from among the sickest. There would have been more, but...
We just ran out of space.
In April 1975, the end of the Vietnam War was near, the fall of Saigon imminent, and people were desperate. As many as could fled the country.
I thought, as everybody else did, that there would be a complete bloodbath and everybody would be killed that had had anything to do with Americans.
Betty could not just wait around hoping someone would save the unlocked children. She flew to Saigon, intent on bringing the nearly 400 orphans to the U.S. for adoption.
I really felt that I was grasping these children away from certain death.
She says the U.S. ambassador promised to airlift them out, but only if the South Vietnamese agreed.
So I went to the Vietnamese government, and he looked at the list and he said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Tisdale, I can't allow out any child over 10.
Why?
Because we're going to hold on. We're not going to give up. We're not going to let the North Vietnamese take over, and we need every child that is over 10 to help fight.
One battle was lost, and now she was told the other 219, the little ones, could not leave the country without birth certificates, and there were none.
I ran right over to the maternity hospital, and I said, I need birth certificates. I'm taking babies out, and I took a whole big handful of them, and we filled them all out at the orphanage.
The trouble was they didn't know when some of them were born, so they made up birth dates and took them to the South Vietnamese government for approval. 2.5 days after arriving in Saigon and circumventing miles of red tape, Betty and 219 orphans boarded buses and then a military transport for the long trip to the U.S. Among them, 2-year-old Vu Tu Nguyen, who had been at On Lock since she was just a few days old. Betty had to leave Madame Nye behind to face an uncertain future with the older children.
In order to save some, you had to give up others, and it's a terrible thing to have to live with.
On April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese troops crashed through the gates of the presidential palace, marking the end of the Vietnam War. And in the United States, a new life was just beginning for little Vu Tu Nguyen.
Do you remember these?
In Philadelphia, Dolores and Henry Sloviter, a law professor and a biochemist, were on a waiting list for a Vietnamese child when they got an unexpected call.
And she said, you can pick up your 2-year-old daughter tonight at 9 o'clock.
Just out of the blue?
Out of the blue. I had nothing. I had no diaper. We had no clothes for children. We had absolutely nothing. We had no warning.
The newly named Vicky arrived with all sorts of infectious diseases, easily treated. There were no medical records, no life story. The only communication, pointing. She always wanted to be held. And of course, none of that mattered a bit to the Sloviters.
The little girl that came to us was really lovable.
I know that no child that came out of my body would ever be as graceful, as gentle, and as pretty as she is.
I'm lucky that I have wonderful parents and that I got out of Vietnam safely, and that I've had a really fortunate life.
As soon as she was old enough to understand, Vicky's parents told her about On Lock.
Did that intrigue you? Did you want to know more about that?
No, I grew up not wanting to be Asian.
Not wanting to be Asian?
I grew up denying the fact that I was Vietnamese.
She wanted to fit in, wanted to be like her friends. She pushed away any suggestion by her parents that she explore her past at all, even refused a trip back to Vietnam with her mother.
For a long, long time, I didn't want to have anything to do with Vietnam or the baby lift or orphans or anything.
But in her early 20s, it began to bother Vicki that she knew almost nothing about her roots, not even her real birthday.
My birthday has always been celebrated on the day that I became a part of my parents' lives. As people grow older, they sort of need to find an identity of some sort.
In 1998, Vicki was reading Life magazine when she came across this contest. If you could meet anyone in the United States, whom would you choose?
The only person who popped into my mind was Betty Tisdale. I mean, no one else, not for a second.
Betty Tisdale, the woman who kept the children of On Loc alive for so many years. To Vicki, she was kind of a myth, just a name, a link to her past. But Vicki didn't even know where Betty was, so she wrote to Life magazine.
Betty Tisdale's selfless efforts spared my life. No spoken words can adequately thank her, but meeting her would allow me to give her a hug worth 1,000 grateful words.
The editors at Life read Vicki's letter and told her they were happy to grant her wish. Betty was stunned. This is the first time they met.
Nothing like this picture.
I consider myself a pretty stoic person, and I found myself crying, and it took me by complete surprise. And I think, if anything, it was just a sort of confirmation that this was the right thing to do.
There was a special connection here. Betty had not felt this way about any of the other On Loc children who had sought her out. But then it became clear. Vicki was dropped off at the orphanage on the same day as one of her own adopted daughters.
To think that she could have been mine.
It's
like that, oh honey.
It's your history for me. You're my past.
They spent a long time talking and combing through Betty's pictures and scrapbook of On Loc. Vicki learned that after the war, Betty managed to get Madame Nye to America, where she lived with Betty for the last 3 years of her life.
You've had 4 mothers. Your original mother,
Right.
Madame Nye,
And you.
me, and your mother now. Here are some of these dresses that I want.
Betty wanted to give Vicki a memento, something tangible from her past.
I couldn't think of anything that I could give her that would mean more than something that was worn by Madame Nye. Brocade, I think, are...
Not very long ago, it wouldn't have meant a thing to Vicki, but it does now. After this, a whole new kind of meaning.
A lot of people would sort of describe it as a closure, but I really do view it more as an opening for me. It's sort of made me say it's okay to be Vietnamese. It's okay to look different, which is great.
You know, my hug.
In the year and a half since their first meeting, the relationship between Betty and Vicki has grown.
She's a part of the family in that I know she's always there for me. You know, and she's like another mother, just a little far away.
Then last June, Betty flew across the continent to be guest of honor when Vicki married her college sweetheart. It's funny what events like this do to people who've been around since the beginning of things.
For one little moment, I pictured these boxes on the plane of babies. And I thought, you know, if only all of them would be able to have a wedding or be as happy as Vicki was that day.
But it turned out to be not the end of the story at all. Meeting with Vicki had stirred something familiar in Betty, which had, truth be told, been bothering her for years.
I just feel empty if I don't do something.
But what? She knew there were still thousands of orphans in Vietnam. They needed somebody's help. So she set up a website, which would be at least a start. She called it HALO, H-A-L-O, for Helping and Loving Orphans, a foundation of sorts.
$3,000.
And that's when she discovered she had not lost her talent for raising money. And with practically no idea of what she could or couldn't accomplish, off she went, back to Vietnam. Here, in a place called Quang Nai, she turned over about $15,000 in donations. The locals used it to build a brand new nursery.
Oh, I love the color.
It's her first visit since the nursery was completed. She inspects each room carefully, making sure the baby's needs will be met.
These are the cribs that I bought.
Oh, you got these too?
I got these, yeah, at $300 for I don't know how many cribs. But isn't this nice?
Betty's determination takes her to the heart of the roaring, crowded city that is Ho Chi Minh, once Saigon, to one of the biggest and oldest orphanages here.
Oh, look at this, darling. Here, come on. Num num. Did you just have something to eat, huh?
Here, in crib after crib, are cleft palates, crooked bones, hearing and vision impairments, heart defects, HIV.
A lot of them are here because they have some problems.
Yes, most of them are abandoned because they are handicapped.
Betty is arranged for a visit by a team of reconstructive surgeons. The doctors from an American group called Face the Challenge volunteer their services, working all day and into the night to give the children a chance at a normal life.
See, she's got a little bitty scar right there.
And Betty waits through every operation.
How old is this baby?
Remarkable what one grandmother can do. Except that isn't the whole story. Betty Tisdale is now supporting orphanages in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Colombia, and Mexico. Once, she was a young secretary, and it didn't make much sense to go running off to Vietnam to tilt at windmills.
So nice.
And now, a generation later, it's as impossible as ever, which is, one begins to suspect, the whole point.
Say bye-bye.
What would your life be like if you didn't have this?
I can't picture it. Oh, my goodness. I can't picture not doing this. This is me.
And you can learn more about Betty Tisdale's Halo Foundation, including ways you can help, on our website.